Hello there, welcome to HFY Sci-Fi Galaxy, where humans face the unknown, outsmart the impossible, and turn every test into victory. So sit back and let the story begin.
Nobody on orbital station Meridian paid attention to the dock worker eating soup in the corner of the lower deck canteen. David Harlow sat alone, as he always did, spooning broth into his mouth and reading a short message from his daughter on a cracked datapad. She was busy again, 3 levels above him, buried in alien languages and diplomatic files. Lena rarely had time to come down and share a meal. He did not blame her. She had built something real up there. He was proud of her in the quiet way fathers are proud when they know they had nothing to do with it. The soup was terrible. The recycled air tasted like old metal. A cargo loader was beeping somewhere behind him, and two traders were arguing about fuel prices near the door. It was a normal day on Meridian, which meant it was loud, ugly, and forgettable. Then every screen on the station turned red. The argument stopped. The beeping stopped. Every person in the canteen looked up at the wall screens as a broadcast cut through all channels at once. The image showed a war fleet, dozens of massive ships arranged in a crescent formation just beyond weapons range. They were Dranaki vessels, dark and angular, built like weapons themselves. That a face appeared on the screen. It belonged to a creature that stood 9 feet tall, with natural bone plating across its chest and forearms like sheets of living armor. Its eyes were deep gold, set into a skull that looked carved from stone. When it spoke, the translation software converted the rumbling alien language into flat English text at the bottom of the screen. I am Goran Shavel, champion of the Dranaki Empire. I invoke the right of dominion. Send your strongest warrior to face me in single combat. If our champion wins, we withdraw from this sector forever. If I win, you surrender 3 colony worlds and accept tributary status under Dranaki law. Refusal will be treated as cowardice, and cowardice will be answered with fire. The broadcast ended. The screens returned to normal. But nothing on the station was normal anymore. Within 20 minutes, Warden Goss had called an emergency meeting in the command center. He was a hard man, former naval officer, built for making ugly decisions under pressure. But when he looked around the room, all he saw were engineers, traders, and cargo handlers. Meridian was a trade hub, not a military outpost. He had no fleet, no army, not even a proper security force beyond a handful of officers with shock batons. Ambassador Priel was already there. She was Sethani, tall, thin, with delicate insect-like features and enormous dark eyes that reflected the light like wet glass. She was humanity's only real ally in this stretch of space, and right now, she looked terrified. You must understand what you are dealing with, Priel said, her voice thin and rapid. The Dranaki have used this method to conquer 11 species. They arrive, they issue the challenge, and their champion destroys whoever steps forward. It is not a fair contest. It is an execution dressed as tradition. Goss crossed his arms. And if we refuse, they invade. Full military assault. They have done it twice before to species that declined. Those species no longer exist as independent civilizations. The room was silent. Goss looked at the faces around the table. A supply officer, a chief engineer, 2 medical staff, a xenolinguist. None of them were fighters. None of them had ever thrown a punch that mattered. What do we know about this champion? Goss asked. Priel activated a holographic display. Footage played, recordings from previous Dranaki challenges across the galaxy. Goran Shavel moved through his opponents like a storm through paper. A 4-armed Brenny warrior lasted 8 seconds before Goran broke both his primary arms and crushed his chest. A Galhuri champion, a species whose bodies were partially calciumite, almost like living rock, crumbled under a barrage of strikes that shattered his torso into fragments. Fight after fight. Species after species. None of them survived more than 30 seconds. He is undefeated, Priel said quietly. Across 40 star systems. No one has ever knocked him down. No one has ever made him bleed. Goss stared at the footage. The Dranaki champion moved with a kind of lazy confidence, like a predator who had forgotten what fear tasted like. Every fight ended the same way. Goran standing over a broken body, barely winded, his gold eyes empty of anything resembling concern. How long do we have? Goss asked. 48 hours. That is standard Dranaki protocol. Goss placed both hands flat on the table and leaned forward. He was not a man who scared easily, but the math here was brutal. No military, no tranfaites, a station full of civilians, and an alien champion who had never lost. Get the word out to every deck, he said. Every section, every shift. I need a volunteer. Someone willing to step into that ring and represent the entire human race. The room emptied. People moved quickly, their faces tight with fear. Priel lingered for a moment, watching Goss with her dark, reflective eyes. Warden, she said softly, I have studied many species. I have watched the Dranaki destroy all of them. I say this with no disrespect. You should consider negotiation. Surrender the worlds. Survive. Goss looked at her for a long time. Then he shook his head. You do not know humans very well, Ambassador. Priel tilted her head. Perhaps not. Goss turned back to the screens, where the Dranaki fleet hung in the darkness like a row of black teeth. Somewhere on the station, he needed to find someone crazy enough or hard enough to stand in front of that monster and not run. He just had no idea where to look. The volunteer list stayed empty for 6 hours. Goss had it posted on every terminal, every wall screen, every notice board across the station. A simple message: champion needed. Single combat. Humanity's future at stake. Below it, a blank space for names. It stayed blank that IT was not that people did not care. They cared too much. They had all seen the footage by now. Every screen in every corridor had looped Goran Shaval's fights until the images were burned into everyone's minds. The Brenny warrior folding like wet cloth. The Galhuri champion shattering into pieces. A serpentine creature from a species no one had heard of being lifted off the ground and slammed down so hard the platform cracked beneath. IT.BY Hour 8. 3 young security officers added their names. Goss brought them in and showed them the full, unedited recordings. Not just the highlights, but the slow, grinding details. The sounds. The way Goran did not rush. The way he watched his opponents struggle and then ended them with the calm patience of someone pulling weeds from a garden. 2 of the officers removed their names by the end of the session. The third stayed for another hour, staring at the wall, then quietly left without a word. Goss was running out of time. 3 levels above the cargo decks. Lena Harlow sat at her workstation in the Xenolinguistics department, surrounded by translation files and alien grammar charts she could no longer focus on. She had watched the Dranaki broadcast like everyone else. She had seen the footage like everyone else. But unlike everyone else, something specific had crawled in her mind and would not leave. Her father. She had spent most of her adult life trying to forget what David Harlow used to be. The underground fighting circuit in Glasgow. The bare-knuckle bouts in basements and warehouse yards across Europe. The blood on his shirts when he came home. The split knuckles. The way he moved through a room like he was always measuring the distance between himself and the nearest exit. She had hated that world. She had hated what it did to him. And she had told him so the day she left for university. He had never argued. He just stopped fighting, took a job on a cargo ship, and eventually followed her to Meridian. Dock worker, crate stacker, a quiet man doing quiet work 3 levels below his daughter, close enough to see her sometimes, far enough to not be a burden. But now Lena could not stop thinking about the thing she had spent years trying to forget. She had seen her father fight, not in recordings, in person. She was 14 years old when she snuck into a warehouse in Paisley and watched him through a gap in the crowd. His opponent was a man half his age, bigger, faster, meaner. Her father had taken 3 punches to the face without flinching, then put the man on the ground with a single right hand that sounded like a car, door slamming shut. The crowd had gone silent. The other man did not get up for 4 minutes. She found David in Cargo Bay 7, stacking fuel cells onto a pallet loader. He was moving slowly, methodically, the way he always did. Like the rest of the universe was in a hurry, and he had decided not to join. Dad. He looked up. He could see it in her face immediately. No, he said. You have not even heard what I am going to say. You're going to ask me to fight that thing. He set down a fuel cell and wiped his hands on his trousers. And I am saying no. Lena stepped closer. There is no one else. The volunteers pulled out. Goss has nobody. David leaned against the pallet loader and looked at his daughter with tired eyes. I am 46 years old, Lena. I have got metal pins in my left knee, a shoulder that pops out if I sleep on it wrong, and hands that ache when the temperature drops. I came up here to be near you, not to fight aliens in a cargo bay. I know. Then you know the answer. She did not push. She never pushed. That was the deal between them. She did not ask about his past, and he did not pretend it had not happened. She nodded once, turned, and walked away. David watched her go. Then he went back to stacking crates. That night, alone in his small quarters on the lower deck, he could not sleep. He lay on his bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the station. After 2 hours, he sat up and pulled out his datapad. He found the footage of Goran's fights. All of them, not just the clips they showed on the screens that he watched each one 3 times. Not like a scared man looking at a monster. Like a fighter studying another fighter, Goran was fast, brutal. His bone plating could absorb enormous punishment. His strikes carried the weight of a species built for war. Every opponent he faced tried the same thing. They tried to match his power, to trade blows, to outmuscle him. And every single one of them died for it. But David saw something else. Something small. Something that only a man who had spent 30 years reading opponents in the half-second before a punch landed would notice. After every kill, Goran dropped his guard. Not much. Just a fraction. His arms lowered, his chest opened, and for one brief moment the bone plates across his torso shifted apart. It was the posture of a creature that had never been hit back. Not once. Not in 40-star systems. Arrogance. The most dangerous weakness in any fighter. David set down the datapad. He sat in the dark for a long time, flexing his scarred hands, feeling the old familiar ache in every knuckle. Then he stood up, pulled on his boots, and walked to Warden Goss's office. The door opened. Goss looked up from his desk, exhausted and hollow-eyed. David said 5 words. I will fight your alien. Goss did not laugh, but he looked at the man standing in his doorway. Medium height, thick build, gray creeping into his short hair, wearing cargo trousers and a worn station-issue jacket. David Harlow looked like exactly what he was. A dock worker who had spent the last 3 years loading fuel cells and eating bad canteen food. Not a soldier. Not an athlete. Just a tired man with rough hands and flat, steady eyes. You are serious, Goss said. I would not be here if I was not. Goss leaned back in his chair. Harlow, I have seen what that thing does to people. Professional warriors. Creatures twice your size. He breaks them like they're made of glass. I have been broken before. There was something in the way he said it. Not dramatic, not tough, just factual, that made Goss pause. He pulled up David's personnel file. Dockhand. 3 years on Meridian. No disciplinary issues. No criminal record in the station database. But the file had a gap. A big one. 20 years of almost nothing before he signed onto a cargo ship heading off-world. What did you do before this? Goss asked. I hit people. Goss stared at him. David stared back. Neither of them blinked. Get Ambassador Priel, Goss said into his comm. Tell her to bring her scanner. Priel arrived within 10 minutes, carrying a portable biological analysis unit that she normally used for cataloging alien specimens. She looked at David with polite confusion. When Goss explained the situation, her confusion turned to concern. Warden, this man is, forgive me, he is not young. He is not trained in any military discipline I can identify. Sending him against Goran Chaval would be scan him first, Goss interrupted. Then tell me what you think. Priel hesitated, then activated the scanner. A thin beam of blue light swept over David from head to feet. He stood still and said nothing while the device hummed and clicked, building a complete biological profile. The results appeared on Priel's display. She read them. Then she read them again. Then she sat down slowly, her dark eyes wide. What? Goss asked. Priel turned the display so he could see it. I've been working with humans for 4 years. I know your biology in academic terms, but I have never compared it directly against the galactic average in a combat context. She pointed to a series of numbers. His bone density is 31% above the galactic norm for sentient species. His skeletal structure is reinforced at every major joint. His muscle fibers are built for sustained output, not explosive speed, but endurance. He can maintain near-peak physical performance for hours. She scrolled down. His cardiovascular system can redistribute blood flow to prioritize critical organs under stress. His pain receptors have a dampening threshold that most species do not possess. He can sustain injuries that would cause neurological shutdown in a Brenny or a Sethani and continue functioning. She looked up at David, and his adrenal response under threat is extraordinary. When a human is frightened or injured, their body does not shut down. It accelerates. Goss looked at the numbers but did not fully understand them. Put in simple terms. Priel set down the scanner. In simple terms, Warden, this man comes from a planet with punishing gravity, extreme temperature ranges, toxic atmosphere variations, and predators on every continent. His species evolved to survive all of it. On paper, a healthy adult human is one of the most dangerous unarmed combatants in the known galaxy. The room was quiet. On paper, Goss repeated. On paper, Priel confirmed. The problem is that Goran Shaval is not on paper. He is 9 feet tall, armored, and has killed every opponent he has ever faced. David, who had been silent through the entire analysis, spoke up. Has he ever fought a human? Priel blinked. No, humanity is relatively new to the galactic stage. The Dranaki have never encountered your species in the right of dominion before. Then he does not know what he is dealing with either. Priel studied him for a long moment. There was something in this human that she could not quantify with her scanner. A stillness that was not calm, exactly, but something harder, like a stone sitting at the bottom of a river, worn smooth by years of current, but impossible to move. Goss made the decision. He had no better options and no more time. Harlow, you have got 36 hours before the fight. Use them however you need. David nodded and left. He did not go to a gym. He did not ask for training equipment or combat simulations. He went back to his quarters, ate a large meal, and went to sleep. The next morning, Lena found him sitting in the canteen, drinking coffee and staring at nothing in particular. She sat down across from him without a word. For a while, they just sat together in the humming quiet of the lower deck. I heard you volunteered, she said finally. Yes. I thought you said no. I changed my mind. She looked at his hands, the scarred knuckles, the thick fingers, the way his right hand was slightly larger than his left from decades of throwing punches. She had spent years hating those hands and what they represented. Now, they were the only things standing between humanity and surrender. Are you scared? She asked. David looked at her. Every time, sweetheart. Every single time. Being scared never stopped a punch from landing. That evening, Goss transmitted humanity's formal response to the Dranaki fleet. He named David Harlow as humanity's champion. The reply came within minutes. A short burst of Dranaki communication that Priel translated with a troubled expression. They say they are amused. David, standing behind Goss, said nothing. Then the main screen flickered, and Goran Shaval's face appeared. The gold eyes stared through the camera as if he could see every human on the station. He spoke one sentence, low and rumbling, and Priel translated it in a whisper. I will try to make it quick. David looked at the screen for a long time. Then he turned around and walked back to his quarters to sleep. They built the ring in 6 hours. The Dranaki sent a construction team from their flagship, 8 workers in dark armor who moved through Station Meridian without speaking to anyone. They cleared the center of Cargo Bay 1, the largest open space on the station, and assembled a circular fighting platform 50 feet across. It was raised 2 feet off the ground, made from a dense black material that rang like iron when the workers bolted it together. No ropes, no walls, no padding, just a flat circle of dark metal under the harsh white lights of the cargo. A wide .b, by the time the platform was finished, word had spread across every deck. People started gathering hours before the scheduled fight. Traders, engineers, medical staff, cooks, mechanics. They filled the bay from wall to wall, standing on crates and maintenance walkways and cargo loaders to get a view. There were over 1,000 people packed into a space meant for freight, and every single one of them was silent. The Dranaki delegation arrived in formation. 12 officers in ceremonial armor, their bone plating polished until it gleamed under the lights. They lined up along the far side of the platform like statues, arms folded, gold eyes watching the crowd with distant interest. They did not speak. They did not need to. Their presence said everything. We have done this before, and we have never lost. An arbiter stepped onto the platform. He was Dranaki, but older, smaller, wearing dark robes instead of armor. He carried a staff topped with a crystal that pulsed with dim light. When he spoke, the station's translation system converted his words into English that echoed through the bay. The right of dominion is sacred. 2 champions will enter. The fight ends when one yields or is unable to continue. Death is an acceptable outcome. There are no other rules. The crowd did not move, did not breathe. The far entrance to the cargo bay opened, and Goran Chauvel walked in. The footage had not prepared anyone for the reality of him. He was enormous, not just tall, but dense, layered with muscle and natural bone armor that covered his chest, shoulders, and forearms like plates of living stone. Every step he took made the deck vibrate. His gold eyes swept across the crowd of humans the way a man might look at insects on a windowsill. There was no hatred in that gaze, no excitement, just the mild boredom of someone who had done this too many times. He stepped onto the platform, and the black metal groaned under his weight. He stood in the center, arms loose at his sides, and waited. The opposite entrance opened. David Harlow walked in wearing cargo trousers and a gray undershirt. No automat. No wraps on his hands. No Mosguarth. He looked exactly like what the station saw every day, a middle-aged dock worker heading to his shift. His hair was cropped short, his jaw was set, and his eyes were fixed on the platform ahead of him. The crowd parted for him in silence. A few people reached out and touched his arm or shoulder as he passed, small gestures from strangers who knew they were watching a man walk towards something terrible. Lena stood at the front of the crowd, gripping the edge of a cargo railing. Her face was pale, her knuckles white. She did not call out to him. She did not need to. When David passed her, his eyes found hers for half a second, and the corner of his mouth lifted just barely. That was enough. He climbed onto the platform. The black metal was cold under his boots. Across 50 feet of empty space, Goran Chauvel looked down at him. The size difference was staggering. Goran could have placed his hand over David's entire face. His arms were thicker than David's legs. The bone plating across his torso shifted slightly as he breathed, like tectonic plates moving beneath living skin. Goran spoke. His voice was deep, resonant, filling the cargo bay like the rumble of a distant engine. Lena translated for those nearby, her voice barely steady. "You are brave, little creature. Bravery will not save you." David looked up at the alien. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. Words were for people who needed to convince themselves they were ready. David had stopped needing that a long time ago. He raised his fists. They were scarred, battered things, knuckles thick with old calcium deposits, fingers slightly crooked from breaks that had healed without proper treatment. They were not the fists of a trained martial artist. They were the fists of a man who had learned to fight in places where there were no rules, no referees, and no one coming to save you. The arbiter raised his staff. The crystal at its tip flared bright. "Begin." The word echoed through the bay. Goran's gold eyes narrowed. He shifted his weight forward, his bone plating clicking as it locked in a combat position. The muscles beneath his armor coiled like steel cables. David did not move. He stood with his fists up, his feet set, his breathing steady. He watched the alien the way he had watched every opponent for 30 years. Not with fear, not with anger, but with the cold, patient focus of a man who knew that the next few minutes would be defined by inches and fractions of seconds. The cargo bay held its breath. Then Goran lunged. The first blow hit David like a freight shuttle. Goran closed the distance in 2 strides, impossibly fast for something that large, and drove his fist into David's ribs with a sound like a hammer striking wetwood. The impact lifted David off his feet and sent him sliding across the black platform, his boots scraping against the metal until he stopped 5 feet from the edge. The crowd gasped. Lena's hand flew to her mouth. David lay on the platform for 2 seconds. His ribs screamed. Something on his left side had cracked. He could feel the edges grinding when he breathed. The pain was enormous, white-hot, filling his chest like boiling water. He got up, not dramatically, not with a roar or a battle cry. He just put one hand on the platform, pushed himself to his feet, and raised his fists again. Blood was already running from a cut above his left ear where his head had bounced off the metal. Goran tilted his head. A small motion. Curious that he came forward again. This time a sweeping backhand aimed at David's head, a blow that had taken the skull off a Galhari champion in a fight 6 years ago. David ducked, but not fast enough. The edge of Goran's armored forearm caught his shoulder and spun him sideways. The joint popped. Not dislocated, but close. David stumbled, dropped to one knee. The Dranaki officers along the edge of the platform stood perfectly still. This was routine for them. The little creature would fall. They always fell. David got up again. Goran hit him a third time. A straight punch to the chest that drove David backward and dropped him flat on his back. The platform rang. The sound echoed through the cargo bay like a bell. Lena was gripping the railing so hard the metal was cutting into her palms. Tears were running down her face, but she did not look away. She could not look away. Every person in the bay was frozen, watching the same terrible thing. A man being destroyed by a creature that outweighed him by 300 pounds and was wrapped in living armor. David lay on his back. The ceiling lights blurred above him. His ribs were broken now, at least 2, maybe 3. His shoulder throbbed. His mouth tasted like copper. The ground beneath him was cold and hard, and some distant, ancient part of his brain told him to stay down. To stay down. It would be over. He thought about Lena. He thought about the warehouse in Paisley, her 14-year-old face watching through the crowd. He thought about every time he had been on this exact same ground, concrete, dirt, wet grass, bare wood, and the one rule that had kept him alive through 30 years of fighting. The ground is where you go to die. So you do not stay there. He got up. Goran stopped. For the first time in the fight, for the first time in 40-star systems. The Dranaki champion did not immediately follow up with another strike. He stood in the center of the platform and stared at the human who kept rising from blows that had ended every fight he had ever had. Something shifted in those gold eyes. Not fear, not yet, but the faintest crack in the wall of absolute certainty that had defined Goran Chauvel's entire existence. Confusion. David spat blood onto the platform. He raised his fists. His left arm was slower now, the shoulder damaged, but his right hand was steady. It was always steady. Goran came forward again, harder this time, anger bleeding into his strikes. He threw a 2-hit combination, a body shot followed by a hooking blow to David's head. David took the body shot. His vision went white for a moment. But the hook he saw coming, and he slipped it by 2 inches, feeling the wind of Goran's fist pass his ear like a passing train that he was learning. Every punch Goran threw was a sentence, and David was reading the language. The alien fought in patterns, reliable, devastating patterns that had never needed to change because no opponent had survived long enough to study them. A jab to test distance, a body blow to fold the opponent. Then the finisher, a massive overhead strike driven by both arms, designed to crush whatever was left. 3 moves. Always 3. And after the third move, Goran's arms came down, his chest opened, and the bone plates across his torso shifted apart for exactly 1 second. A gap appeared just below his sternum, a space where the natural armor separated during the follow-through of the overhead blow. David had seen it in the footage. Now he saw it in person. 1 second, 1 opening. That was all he would get. Goran launched the combination. First strike, David slipped left, letting the jab graze his temple. Pain, but manageable. Second strike, the body blow. David twisted and caught it on his hip instead of his broken ribs. His leg went numb. He did not care. Third strike, the overhead. Goran brought both arms up, bone plating locking into attack position, and drove them downward with every ounce of force his body could generate. David stepped inside, and he moved not backward but forward, into the space between Gorn's arms, so close he could feel the heat radiating from the alien's body. The overhead blow crashed down behind him, missing by inches, the wind of it pressing against his back like a shove. And there it was, the gap. The plates separated, exposing a strip of unarmored flesh below the sternum. Everything David Harlow had ever been went into his right hand. 30 years of bare-knuckle fighting. The gravity of Earth baked into every bone. The dense, endurance-built muscle of a death-world species that had been punching things since before it learned to speak. And behind all of it, something that could not be measured by scanners, the pure, stubborn, unreasonable refusal of a human being to stay on the ground. The punch was a straight right. Simple, clean, driven from his legs, through his hips, through his shoulder, and into the gap in Gorn's armor like a piston. The sound it made was something no one in that cargo bay would ever forget. A deep, wet crack that seemed to come from inside the alien's chest, echoing off the walls and sealing like a second heartbeat. Gorn froze, his gold eyes went wide. He looked down at the small, broken, bleeding human whose fist was still pressed against his chest. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then the undefeated champion of 40-star systems dropped to his knees. The platform shook. His arms fell to his sides. His eyes rolled upward, and Gorn Chaval fell face first onto the black metal and did not move. Silence. 1 second. 2 seconds. 5. Then Station Meridian erupted. The noise was deafening. 1,000 voices crashed together like a wave hitting rock, screaming, crying, laughing, calling David's name, even though most of them had not known an hour ago. People were hugging strangers. A cargo loader operator was sobbing into his hands. Somewhere near the back of the crowd, someone had started chanting a word over and over. It spread through the bay until it became a single roaring pulse that shook the walls. Harlow! 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 On the platform, David stood alone. His right arm hung at his side, the hand swelling already, 2 fingers bent at angles that fingers should not bend. His ribs ground against each other with every breath. His left shoulder had gone from damaged to useless somewhere in the last 30 seconds. Blood covered the left side of his face from the cut above his ear, and his gray undershirt was soaked dark across the chest. He did not raise his arms. He did not celebrate. He stood over the fallen champion and breathed, because breathing was the only thing his body could still do without pain. The Dranaki Arbiter moved quickly. He knelt beside Gorn and placed a device against the champion's chest. After a moment, he stood and faced the crowd. His expression was unreadable, but his voice carried clearly through the translation system. The champion lives. He is unable to continue. 3 internal bone plates are fractured. The human is the victor. The bay erupted again, but the Dranaki officers did not react with anger. That was the thing that surprised everyone who was watching closely enough to notice. 12 armored warriors stood along the edge of the platform, and not one of them reached for a weapon. Not one of them stepped forward in rage or protest. Instead, they did something that Ambassador Priel would later describe as the most significant moment in human-alien relations she had ever witnessed. They bowed. All 12 of them, in perfect unison, lowered their heads toward the bleeding dockworker standing on their sacred platform. It was deep, slow, and unmistakably reverent. In Dranaki culture, Priel would explain, defeating a champion in the right of dominion was not just a military victory. It was a spiritual event. The winner had proven that their species carried something worth respecting, a fire that could not be extinguished by force. David watched them bow and felt nothing but the overwhelming need to sit down. The Dranaki commander stepped onto the platform. He was tall, though not as large as Gorn, with silver streaks across his bone plating that marked his rank. He spoke directly to David, and the translation came through in a flat, formal tone. You have broken our champion. By the laws of the right, all Dranaki territorial claims in this sector are withdrawn. Your worlds are your own. David nodded once. His vision was starting to blur at the edges. The commander continued. We offer humanity a place in the Dranaki Combat Accord. an alliance of species who have proven themselves in the ring. It has not been extended to a new species in 90 years. We extend it now. David opened his mouth to respond, but his legs chose that moment to give up. He sat down hard on the platform, and the crowd went quiet again, 1,000 people holding their breath at once. "Someone get me a medic," David said, "and a cup of tea." The laughter that followed broke the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. The station medical team reached him in seconds. They loaded him onto a stretcher and rushed him to the medical bay, listing injuries as they went: 4 broken ribs, a fractured collarbone, a dislocated shoulder, 2 broken fingers, a cracked metacarpal, internal bruising across 70% of his torso, and a concussion. The lead medic, a woman named Dr. Farrow, who had been treating dockworker injuries for a decade, looked at the scans and shook her head. "You should be dead," she told him. "I've been told that before," David said, and then passed out. Lena reached the medical bay 12 minutes later. She had fought through the crowd, sprinted up 2 levels, and nearly knocked over a maintenance cart on the way. When she arrived, David was unconscious, hooked up to monitors and 4 lines, his right hand wrapped in a stabilizing brace. She sat beside his bed and held his left hand, the one that was not broken, and did not move for 3 hours. When David woke up, the first thing he saw was his daughter's face. She was asleep in the chair beside him, her hand still wrapped around his. Her cheeks were streaked with dried tears. Her hair was a mess. She looked exhausted and young, and exactly like her mother had looked 25 years ago, falling asleep beside him after a fight in a cold Glasgow flat. He squeezed her hand gently. She woke up instantly. "Hey," he said. "Hey." Her voice cracked. "You are an idiot." "Probably." She laughed and cried at the same time, and he let her because some things did not need words. Ambassador Priel visited later that evening. She stood at the foot of his bed, her dark eyes studying him with the same quiet intensity she brought to every alien species she had ever analyzed. But this time there was something else in her gaze, something close to awe. "I have a question," she said, "one that has been troubling me since the fight." "Go ahead." "He hit you 4 times. Any one of those blows would have killed a Brenny, would have shattered a Galhari, would have ended any fighter from any species in the galactic record. But you kept standing." She paused. "Ow!" David thought about it. He looked at his bandaged hand, his wrapped ribs, the monitors beeping steadily beside him. He thought about the concrete floors of Glasgow warehouses, the frozen mud of bare-knuckle rings in winter, the 100 times he had been on his back staring at a ceiling and making the same choice. "Where I come from," he said slowly, "the ground is where you go to die. So you do not stay there." Priel said nothing for a long time. Then she nodded once and left. 3 weeks later, the Dranaki sent a formal communication across their entire network, a message that reached every species, every system, every world that had ever dealt with the Dranaki Empire. It was short. It was not a threat or a warning. It was something far more powerful. A fact. Do not challenge the Deathworlders. Their champions do not know how to fall. David Harlow never saw the message. By the time it was sent, he was back on the lower deck, moving slower than before, his ribs still wrapped, his right hand in a brace that the doctor said he would need for another month. He was stacking crates again because the crates were not going to stack themselves, and he was not the kind of man who sat around waiting for his body to agree with his plans. But something had changed. Every day now, around noon, Lena came down to the lower deck canteen with 2 cups of terrible coffee. She sat across from him, and they talked about small things, her work, his shifts, a funny argument between 2 traders, the way the station lights flickered when the power cycled. Small things. Normal things. He was a dock worker. She was a linguist. The coffee was awful. The air tasted like metal, and the station hummed its endless, ugly hum. And that was enough.